Testing, 1, 2. All right. Good evening. Thank you all for being here in person, online, our panelists. We really appreciate everybody being here. Um, we've gotten a lot of questions already that people could submit before the event. A lot of those questions were about the makeup of this panel and who all was invited. So I think it's important to address that at the top. I think if you're here, you're interested in this issue and you know what's at stake. So the big stakeholders that we started with were Resolution Copper, the San Carlos Apache Tribe, and Apache Stronghold. They were all invited to be here tonight, and um, we've been working literally for months to try to line up this panel and make sure that it was diverse, that all viewpoints were heard from. There's a lot of strong feelings and emotions about this issue, and we thought it was really important to have a well-rounded discussion, and our main goal was not to have a debate, but to make sure everyone left here more informed about what's happening, what's at stake, and what everybody's fighting about. To that end, we do have San Carlos Apache represented here tonight. Chairman Rambler was originally going to be here tonight, but had to postpone at the last moment. So we're very thankful that Alex Ritchie, the tribe's attorney general, has stepped in on very short notice. So we're very grateful to Alex and the rest of our panelists who Gabe will give a formal introduction to. Resolution Copper did confirm that they were going to participate tonight, along with one of their consultants and the mayor of Superior, who are all kind of on one side of this issue to some degree. We've never had people confirm that they were going to be here and then withdraw that confirmation, but that's what happened in this situation. Resolution Copper said they had advice from their legal counsel that after further consideration, they did not want to show up here tonight. And then we got the other cancellations in short order after that. So I just think it's important to address who all was invited to be here, who was confirmed to be here. And as I said, Gabe will formally introduce who is here, and we're very thankful for our 5 panelists. It's a complex issue. It's an emotional issue. People have very strong feelings about this, which again is why we wanted to have a balanced discussion that kind of addressed all viewpoints. We also think it's really important, especially in this day and age, to have civil discourse. It's okay to have polite disagreement, but again, we didn't want to set up a debate or a shouting match, but we view it as our job to help inform our audience about what's happening and have a thoughtful civil discussion. Our moderator tonight is KJZZ reporter Gabriel Pietrorazio, who's been working tirelessly for months to find out everything he can about Oak Flat and Resolution Copper and the mine. If you've been listening to his stories this week, he took you inside the mine, 7,000 feet deep. Is that how far you went? Yeah. He's really put his heart and soul into this reporting project. It's a really amazing 7-part series we're running this week. If you haven't caught it all or any of it, I really encourage you to check it out. You can get that at oakflat.kjzz.org. Without further ado, I turn it over to Gabe.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate your time. Before I introduce our panel, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor. Tonight's discussion is made possible by Katina Foundation, and the Katina Foundation is dedicated to restoring human and ecological systems. Thank you for this evening, and thank you to our panelists who are here. We really appreciate all of your expertise and input as we discuss this really critical issue. Been digging into this for 6 months or so. Really, it started in 2023 when I went to Oak Flat for the first time and had an interesting experience there, seeing the land and experiencing that. And I've had the opportunity to go underground, essentially, and to go down the number 10 mine shaft, which is the one there on the left. Chad, would you mind? Thank you. And so, before we go further in this discussion, I'd like to introduce our panelists. To my immediate right is Marcus Mactima, who is a historian and a member of the San Carlos Apache tribe in eastern Arizona. He's an assistant professor in American Indian history at Northern Arizona University and helps his tribal community as an instructor teaching Apache history at the San Carlos Apache College. And Mactima completed his doctoral studies at the University of Oklahoma. To his right is Russ McSpadden, and he is the Southwest Conservation Advocate at the Tucson headquartered Center for Biological Diversity, where he has been there since 2012. And then to his right is Henry Munoz, who was born and raised in the town of Superior, Arizona. He is a former three-term Superior Town Councilman, retired fifth-generation miner, and he is now chairman of the Grassroots Concerned Citizens and Retired Miners Coalition. And then to his right is San Carlos Apache Tribe Attorney General Alex Ritchie, stepping in for Chairman Terry Rambler. And then to his right is Kurt Shannon, who is the interim director of the Arizona Mining Reform Coalition and a founding member of the Concerned Climbers of Arizona, which has worked to protect Oak Flat and other climbing areas threatened by mining activity and other forms of land use since 2004. If we could advance to the next slide. So this is just a view to set the scene a bit, about 7,000 feet underground. The mine shaft, the number 10 mine shaft is right there at the end, and it drops to 6,943 feet to be exact. That's when they sank the mine shaft. And if you can continue, had a chance to go underground and take a tour and see what it's like underground. And I also had a chance to meet with elders from San Carlos and other community members, if you'd like to advance. And had to really dig into both sides of this really complex issue and understand what's at stake for these communities and some of the key stakeholders that are here tonight. And if you can advance again. This is just a mapping from the final environmental impact statement, the FEIS, which basically shows how the scale and size of the mine, if approved and completed. Sure. To the far right is Skunk Camp, which is listed as a tailings location. And right around where the red dot to the farthest to the right, that's where that big circle, that's kind of where the mine would be, on the corner there within the Tonto National Forest and east of Superior. And then these are other elements of the mine stretching all the way out into Santan Valley, going through Florence, down as far as Kearney, and upwards of to top of the world. So it just gives you a sense of the scale of what we're talking about here with the size of this mine. Yeah, Oak Flat is kind of, we have a slide that will show that as well. But kind of like where that corner is in the bottom of the circle, where it says underground mine, East Plant Site, that's kind of in that general area where the Oak Flat parcel, which is about a little over 700 acres, is located, which is kind of the scene that we have here for this mining project, and whether it may or may not adversely impact the communities that call it home and have cultural ties there, and recreationalists within the Tonto National Forest. And so with that being said, I want to start with Marcus, because he's our resident historian and our expert on history. And we talked about for hours about Apache history and your specialization in 19th century history moving forward and bringing Apache cultures and peoples into the contemporary 21st century. Could you talk a bit about the significance of Oak Flat in relation to today, historically and today, essentially? And where do you see all of that kind of set us up for the conflict that we have now that's at hand?
Yeah, sure. I actually did publish a chapter in an anthology series for 21st Century American Wests, and I kind of associated this issue to other issues that we had in the past as well in the San Carlos Apache tribe. So another similar instance of something like this happening is with Mount Graham. I don't know if many people are familiar with Mount Graham and a telescope that was constructed there in the 90s, but the whole reason I decided to do this kind of history on our own people and our own tribe is because of these kind of similar ideas and thoughts that I was hearing growing up on the reservation in the 90s. People calling different places sacred, some people not saying sacred, and all that kind of stuff. There's a bit of a discourse that happens on the tribe between these different places, right? And I wanted to know more about that. Like, why are people talking about these issues, and why are some people saying sacred and not sacred? All these different things that are happening on the reservation, right? And we saw this with Oak Flat, especially. We had several members of the tribe come out and say that this place is not sacred. Well, why is that? Why is that the case? And what I came to understand is, all of this stuff really goes back to the 19th century. The 19th century history that we have as Apache peoples sets up the stage for what we see in the contemporary when it comes to these kinds of land disputes. Now, with the Apaches in particular, people have to know and understand when you talk about the culture of the Apache peoples, right? There's not a single culture. There is no one individual Apache nation. That never existed. There's not even a word in our language for that, right? The way that we think of a centralized governing system or governing body, that never existed for Apaches ever. And so, because of that, right, that you have to understand that before you go into this issue altogether, because then you see where different peoples might have different claims, where different clans or bands of the tribe might also have different connections to different places as well. And Oak Flat is definitely one of those locations. The chairman himself told me about some stories about his own family as well, and how he can tell his people's stories that go all the way back to Oak Flat. And he's definitely made that point many times. But for my own people, like, I'm from the same tribe, but we don't have those same stories, right? But why is that? Why do we have different stories? And that was the underlying um, issue that I really wanted to investigate when we talked about this issue. And of course, it goes all the way back to the 19th century when Arizona was trying to remove all these different peoples onto one location, and that one location was San Carlos. Right? That reservation was a concentration reservation, essentially, right, where all these different tribes came together. And when you get to the 20th century, out of our one reservation, you get the Fort McDowell Reservation, the Camp Verde Reservation, the Yavapai Apache Reservation, the Fort McDowell Reservation, the Tonto Reservation. You get all these different tribes that come out of our place because all those peoples were removed there. But there are still remnants of that on the reservation as well. And so, because of that, you have different stories, you have different places, you have different peoples, you have different grandparents telling you different stories. And that's the big thing for me when I'm looking at this, right? And the same thing was true for Mount Graham, right? You can kind of see a little bit of a similar discussion going on when it comes to understanding the issue at hand. When you break it down to identity and how people view themselves and how people remember their history and how they remember their past, then that's when things totally change altogether when you look at the issue. Because now we have this homogenized um, tribal entity, right? That wasn't built by us. That was built by the federal government. The government formalized the creation of the San Carlos Apache tribe, when before the one never existed. They tried to put all these peoples together, create a whole new government with a whole new system that did not respect our traditional systems at all. Right? The Constitution itself does not reflect our own traditional heritage at all. Right? And because of that, now we identify ourselves through this colonial system that attempts to speak for us as Apaches, when in reality, that is not the case at all. And so when we come to Oak Flat in the 21st century, this is essentially the consequence of all of that history in the past, going through the 19th and 20th century. In the 21st century, we see all these new discussions. However, now I think the benefit that we have now is that we have an entity to fight to fight different government agencies, to fight universities, to fight mining corporations, to fight all these different things because we have this entity. So yes, it was a bad thing altogether, but now we have a way to actually fight back as well. So there is that other side to it. But for me, the main issue was trying to find out why people say it's not sacred and why it is sacred. And in the end, it actually doesn't really matter to a degree, right? Because it matters to certain peoples and not others. But when you look at the actual traditional cultural side of things, it does matter, right? It matters to these people over here. But because these people say it is and others don't, doesn't negate the fact that that is to somebody from our tribe, right? That's the big point. So I hope that answered that.
Isn't he great? Good history lesson here. That's not free. Thank you, Marcus. There's a lot to condense in a couple hundred years of history there, and he did that in a couple minutes. So I give him kudos to that. And we talked for hours about all that history, and it's fascinating and it's important. That kind of sets the stage for all these competing issues and interests with, Oak Flat and the Tonto National Forest. And I want to turn my direction to Russ for a bit. If you could talk a bit about what's at stake environmentally. I know Center for Biological Diversity has been on this issue for since the beginning, effectively, with some of the co-founders and thereafter. But could you talk a bit about? We got a lot of questions from people online and in person already about how does this affect the water? How does this affect the land? I was wondering if you could start with that and then like to pivot to Kurt after to talk about some of the recreational side because we got a lot of questions about camping and climbing as well.
Sorry, everyone can hear me? Great. Yeah, I'll just start, briefly. I work at the Center for Biological Diversity. We're a national organization, but we're headquartered in Tucson. So the Southwest is central to our mission. And I work in the Southwest program, so much of the work I do is mostly in Arizona, but also some in New Mexico, looking to safeguard public lands and critical habitat for threatened and endangered species in the Southwest. And I've worked, around, the center has worked on the battle at Mount Graham. Some of our founders really got a big start there, marching against the scopes that the U of A was putting up, and have been central in the sort of environmental battle at Oak Flat. And just to try to, how many folks here have been to Oak Flat? Have many people? Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yeah, Oak Flat, is really, to just sum it up, Oak Flat's a biological gem in many ways. If you wander beyond the campground, very quickly you could find yourself in a riparian canyon. And in Arizona, riparian canyons are a truly endangered ecosystem type. 90% of the riparian areas in the state have been destroyed since the 19th century. A great deal of that from mining, water use, but other developments and has driven those systems to be only about 10% of what used to exist still exists. So a core value that we have is that these types of ecosystems need to be saved in the species that associate with them. A great deal of the biodiversity in Arizona is built around these riparian ecosystems. So as they go, so goes the biodiversity. And just to give a sense, I've worked with Roger Featherstone from the Arizona Mining Reform Coalition on a more than 10-year wildlife monitoring program with cameras in and around Oak Flat and in the canyons. And what we see out there is just absolutely incredible. Like troops of Coatimundi, 30 or 40 strong, a really rich and healthy mountain lion population, a healthy bear population in that area. Sometimes you can go to these places and you won't see these animals because they're staying away from you. But when you monitor these on camera, you see that they're roaming everywhere out there, and there's really significant species. Oak Flat is a critical corridor for wildlife movement that connects the superstitions and other places in the Tonto National Forest. An ocelot was seen there, sadly run over by a car in 2010. And we've had ocelots in other ranges nearby. And so this kind of riparian habitat is important for species like that as we hope to see them recover. And so that's sort of the groundwork of why we care about Oak Flat in terms of the ecosystem, is because it's an absolutely critical ecosystem in the state. And the proposal for the Resolution Copper Mine, it would be absolutely devastating. And I'm sure others will talk about this, and I won't go into too much detail, but you've probably heard the stat of once the block cave mining creates a void beneath the earth, the earth will actually subside, and we'd have about a 2-mile wide crater, as deep as the Eiffel Tower, and the springs and the riparian areas will almost certainly be dewatered. Resolution Copper constantly says that's not the case, but history and science tell us absolutely otherwise. The place would be utterly destroyed. The habitat for the wildlife would be destroyed, and obviously a significant cultural site, sacred site there. And beyond that, there's the issue of the tailings and the toxic waste. The amount of tailings, the waste rock, and the toxic stuff that they don't need will be liquefied, sent through a pipeline, a dozen or more miles to Skunk Camp, which is state trust land in the Dripping Springs area, and it's the watershed of the Gila River, right just above a perennial part of the Gila River where the water is always flowing. And that's going to do incredible damage there as well. So it's not just right at Oak Flat, but also associated lands farther out. And then, I'll just end on water use. Resolution Copper has finally agreed that it is about at least 250 billion gallons of water will be used over the life of the mine. That's maybe 40 years. And to break that down a little bit, that's 17 million gallons a day, which is really significant. And that total water supply, this is what's kind of crazy. It might have even been Alex that told me this once, or someone else, is that to put that in perspective, it would be a 12,500 mile river of water is about how much water they would use. And how ridiculous, there's no river that's long. You have to make up the size of a river to talk about how much water they would use. And in one of the most arid regions in the country. So yeah, and one thing I guess that two things that I would like to point out is that it's fundamentally unjust to site a mine at a significant cultural and sacred site, just plain and simple. And so the entire process, in my opinion, is that this is a completely unjust process. This is completely unjust from the ground up. Just siting a mine there is absolutely horrendous. We saw, Rio Tinto, who's behind this, blew up the Yukon Gorge in Australia, 46,000-year-old cultural site, and they promised they would never do it again. But here we are. And the other thing I would say is you can't drink copper. Our state's water is far more valuable than the copper that Resolution's going to pull out.
I know that was a loaded question there, Russ, for you to talk about a lot of those things. And thanks for setting the stage. And admittedly, by Resolution Copper's own account, it will take about a millennium for the groundwater to reach equilibrium in the area where they're pumping in the desert well field, which is part of the Phoenix AMA, among many other things. Chad, could you advance? This actually talks about the subsidence and shows modeling from the FEIS year 41 of what Russ was actually describing. The square rectangle in green refers to the Oak Flat parcel, the 760 some odd acres. And Resolution Copper had told us that 70% of what the tribe defines as Oak Flat had been left alone. And to the west of the western side of the crater is Apache Leap, which was also foregone, about 800 acres there of mining claims that the company could have used, but decided to create a special management area as part of a conservation easement. And then to the west of Apache Leap is just the town of Superior. It's on the other side of that, effectively. Um, to that point, Attorney General Ritchie, do you have thoughts about the company claiming that it's foregoing 70% of what the tribe defines as Oak Flat? Do you have any thoughts about the subsidence? I know we can talk about that for an extended period of time, but just that remark about foregoing that area effectively as an appeasement or a concession to the tribe.
Thank you for the question. This is a very complicated issue, and I'm here as the attorney for the tribe. There are 3 lawsuits that are challenging this mine. The first is Apache Stronghold, which is currently before the Supreme Court. And I note that they have been at conference, the Supremes, 10 times so far. They're going another round this Friday. The second case was San Carlos Apache Tribe's case. Our case was not addressing the cultural religious aspects. It was addressing mainly the NEPA issue. NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act, and something called the National Historic Preservation Act. The third was brought by the Intertribal Council of Arizona and a number of environmental folks who were at the table. The tribe's issue is several-fold. The first part being a tremendous historic, cultural, and religious value. There's a lot of evidence to that effect. Resolution Copper paid for a study that showed there are multiple tribes that have connections to that area, and there are burial sites, there are archaeological sites, and admittedly in the study, religious sites. This is akin to a mine that is underneath St. Peter's Basilica, or the Wailing Wall, or Angkor Wat. Our colleague over here mentioned the Junkan Gorge, and that was a 40,000-year-old site. Tribes from around the world have contacted San Carlos, from Africa, from Australia, from South America, all saying the same thing. These same mining companies came in, they took our water, they took our sites. What's fascinating about this process is that the model that these two companies, Rio Tinto and BHP Billiton, have built is the same model that they have employed around the world. And that is, you co-opt the legislature, which is what happened here. In 2015, after 10 years that the tribe had fought to keep this bill off the floor of the House and Senate, 5 minutes before the end of the legislative session, the 2015 National Defense Appropriations Act, which is a must-pass bill, magically included this bill, which was the Southeastern Arizona Land Exchange and Conservation Act, which transferred a huge swath of the Tonto National Forest and just gave it to these two foreign giants. So the model used to be that foreign governments, such as Europe and even the United States, would do that to smaller countries in Africa and Latin America, Central America. Well, here you have two companies which know geographical boundaries, and they were able to get Congress to pass this bill. So the first issue is, of course, we've been opposing this for 10 years, but not only will it desecrate a cultural site, but if it is approved, and it's at this point in this administration where it may be, 750,000 acre feet of water will be consumed. You heard a little statistic over here. Let me just highlight that a little bit more. If you take an acre and you put it on its side, acre high and acre wide, that's a tunnel that could go 120 miles. Where have you seen anywhere in the world a tunnel that's an acre high and an acre wide that goes for 120 miles? If it was a salt river, it would, as my colleague pointed out, and this was something that was pointed out by our expert, and his name is James Wells. He's internationally renowned. He works with L. Everett and Associates. and he reviewed the EIS. He pointed out that if it was the salt, which is 100 feet wide, 5 feet deep on average down here in the valley, that would stretch halfway around the planet. That's what 126,000 miles looks like. We could talk about gallons, and that's a huge number. But what's fascinating about this is a limited liability corporation. And as a limited liability corporation, they can walk away. They can walk away from a Superfund site. They can walk away from any damage that they can do. And the same two mining companies, one of them in particular, has built tailing dams that have failed and killed thousands of people. One of those communities contacted San Carlos and said, "We support you, because what happened to us should not happen to San Carlos." That was stunning. There's another side to this. These two companies are the largest suppliers of copper to a company called Chinalco, Chinese state-owned mineral company. They are the largest suppliers of copper. Now, Resolution Copper will say, "Oh, this copper is going to supply the demand for environmental products that this country, United States, needs to move forward in the green revolution." Nonsense. 14.6% of Resolution Copper is owned by Chinalco. The copper concentrate that they're going to produce is not going to be refined in the United States, because right now there's not enough smelter capacity for that copper. It's going to instead go down to Guaymas, get on a ship, go straight to China, and it's going to supply China's defense industry. Now, what's stunning about this is John McCain knew this at the time. This is no new news. It's solid news, and you can look it up. It's a fact. And this is for $160 billion worth of copper. It's about 20 million tons of copper. Yes, it's going to be one of the largest mines in the world. Yet, nobody is talking about that. Nobody is talking about it. Instead, we're talking about tariffs that are going to be placed on China bringing copper in. China does not need to import copper to the United States. It has its own demand, which will suck up that 25%. So we got into this, the tribe rather, got into this because there is the EIS. And the EIS, our expert pointed out, was completely flawed. The model that showed how much water would be used was flawed. The data that was collected was flawed. The cumulative impacts that they said were going to occur was flawed. And that's because they did not look at the region's water supply. How can the region, let alone the state, afford 750,000 acre feet of water disappearing? Let me tell you one other fact. Pinal County is facing a 9 million acre foot deficit over the next 100 years. Now, Senator Kelly will say this mine is over 40 years, but that's 100 years. And this mine represents 10% on top of that. Every Arizonan in this state needs to be concerned about that. That means that not only will the towns of Queen Creek and Superior not have water because it will drain the Apache Tuff aquifer, but the water that goes to the East River, the East Valley, is also going to disappear. One day, someone's going to wake up and they're going to say, I'm in the East Valley, I have no water. And what are they going to do? The only other supply of water that exists is in San Carlos. So the mine will tell you, we're not going to touch any of the tribe's water. This is a plenary power that's at issue here. What Congress giveth, Congress can taketh away. Sure, the tribe has a settlement act for water, but that water right can disappear if enough people go to Congress and say, you took our water, we want it back. So that's why the tribe entered into the issue. In addition to the cultural and the historic and religious values, there's also another last part, which is the Historic Preservation Act. NEPA requires compliance with the act to mitigate damage to historic sites. the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation chimed in and said, here too, the Forest Service failed. So that's the legal picture. Those are the facts. And I think every Arizona needs to take a look at this, a hard look at this, talk to Senator Kelly, talk to Senator Gallegos, talk to every representative in Arizona and say, this mine has to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General. And just to add on to some of the points that he made, I asked Resolution Copper's President General Manager Vicky Pesci about the smelting issue and about where the copper concentrate that would be developed on site would go. And I said, would there be a commitment to do it at Kennecott, which is in Utah, which is owned by Rio Tinto? And they said that effectively they could not make a commitment to doing it there due to the delays in the land exchange and the FEIS being finalized. They also said that it would be practical for Resolution Copper to send its copper concentrate to Rio Tinto's Utah smelter, and would be well positioned to conduct smelting and refining in the U.S., but did not commit to it due to the FEIS and the land exchange delays. Chad, would you mind skipping to the next slide? That's the final environmental impact statement. And that's actually a good introduction there, Henry. How many pages is that? 6 volumes? What I read through it a couple times.
There's a good 6 volumes, about almost 5,000 pages
5,000, yeah.
with different charts and graphs.
I've gone through it a few times, and I cannot say I read every sentence, but I'm pretty sure Henry has, and for all the years. And you brought all your facts and you brought all your images. I'd like to give you a chance to talk a bit about your take on all of this. I know, Superior resident. Curious you could weigh in on what everyone has said thus far, but also, what are attitudes like in Superior? Like, is it divided, or is everyone for Resolution Copper? I've been there many a time, meeting with people in downtown by the Magma Hotel and on the Strip.
I'll just give you a brief introduction about my experiences as a miner. Born and raised in the beautiful town of Superior, Arizona. If for any of you that have been there, you will agree that it's a beautiful country. Okay, I come from 5 generations of underground miners. Okay, my grandfather, my father, myself, my son, and my grandson. When this project first came on board, I was happy. I said, "Oh my God, they're gonna open up the mine." I worked in Superior for 8 years, doing the cut field process, which they have done historically in Superior. And later on, when that mine shut down in '82, displacing 1,200 workers, I went to go work at the Salmon Well mine, where they do the block cave mining. Totally, it's different from day to night. That I worked 13 years there, and that mine closed down in 1999, displacing almost 3,300 workers there. And ironically, when that mine closed down, they left 30 years of copper underground. But BHP had purchased from Magma the mine, Pinto Valley, Salmon Well, and Superior. Well, in 1996, when they purchased it for $3 billion, 3 years later, they shut Salmon Well down for $3 billion. That just goes to show you that these big corporations don't care. They'll snap their fingers and they'll just close down any properties if they're not making any money. Like I tell you, when I heard the mine was opening up, I was excited. But when I found out it was going to be block cave mining and the magnitude of the project, and when you asked how the company, the town feels about this mine, basically nobody in Superior really knows about block cave mining. I mean, there was probably 50 of us that worked at Salmon Well that worked in Superior. And out of those 50, more than half have already passed on. It is my job as chairman of the Concerned Citizens to educate the community and say, hey, this mine isn't all it's said to be, what they're telling you. So my mission, like I said, is to educate people about this mine. And when I found out it was, like I said, block caving, I said, oh my God, not in Superior, not in my hometown. Here's a picture of a 3D model that I have in my garage, and I use it for exhibits when we're giving shows about the mine in itself. As you can see, this is going to be 2 miles wide. 1,000 feet deep. Right here is the highway. If you can see it, this little line is US 60 going up through Queen Creek Canyon. This is a huge, huge subsidence area. When the company came out, they were telling the people in the town site, oh, little to no subsidence. 2 miles wide, 1,000 feet deep. That's a big hole. I call it a toilet bowl. Okay? I'll tell you how big this toilet bowl is. This toilet bowl is big enough to put the Golden Gate Bridge in it. The subsidence zone width is 9,842 feet. The Golden Gate Bridge length is 6,450 feet. Those stats were taken off the FEIS, Volume 1, page 190. That's how wide it's going to be. You could set the Golden Gate Bridge in there. How deep is this toilet bowl? Eiffel Tower. You could put the Eiffel Tower in that hole and you'd barely be able to see the top. Eiffel Tower height, 984 feet. Crater subsidence zone depth, 800 to 1,000 feet. That's taken off the FEIS. Well, this toilet bowl, you got to flush it. Here you have a picture of El Marro. This is down in Chile. This is the third largest tailing dam in the world. Yeah. Okay. In comparison to what Resolution Copper is going to leave behind, their height is going to be 500 feet. El Marro is 700 feet. El Marro is going to have 1.7 billion tons. The Resolution tailing site is going to have 1.5. The footprint it's going to disturb is 15,000 acre feet. So that goes to show you what this process is going to do. Water usage. This project is going to use approximately 40,000 acre feet of water. That's what you're going to need each year to operate this mine. That's a lot of water. The city of Tempe uses that much in a year. There's 160,000 people in the city of Tempe. So that shows you the magnitude of this destruction. Okay? The sad thing about that is that Superior, my beautiful hometown, is going to suffer the consequences environmentally. Let me read you an excerpt from the FEIS concerning the water damage that's going to occur. This is from volume 2 FEIS, page 375, talking about the damage that's going to occur to our two aquifers that sit below Oak Flat. Modeling could be avoided entirely if the assumption could be supported that post-mine conditions would eventually return to pre-mining conditions. This will never occur. Block caving is anticipated to fundamentally alter the hydrological framework of the aquifer system, effectively eliminating the whitetail conglomerate unit that to date has separated the deep groundwater system from the Apache aquifer. There is no expectation that the post-mine aquifer system eventually will look the same as it does today. Modeling is the most appropriate tool to predict how an altered aquifer system, fundamentally different from current conditions, would function. Somebody asked what the FEIS was. Resolution Copper paid for that FEIS to the tune of $4 million. It was a study that took 4 to 6 years. Isn't it strange that they could pay for a study, $4 million, to tell the town of Superior, we're going to screw up your water? I mean, my God, that's like giving me a gun and having me shoot myself. You know, my job, like I said, is to educate the people. You know, the town is not going to reap any economic benefits from this. Let me show you these figures from a study that the town conducted itself. They found out they weren't getting enough money from this project because basically all the money is going to different entities. The majority, federal government, the state, the county, the schools, but the town is on the bottom. Let me show you something. Hold on. Here we have a fiscal impact of Resolution Copper on the town of Superior by the McGuire Consultants. We're at page 1. It said the development and operation of the Resolution Copper mine adjacent to the town of Superior will have significant impacts on the town's operation and budget. The mine will be a major regional employer and will generate substantial economic activity and substantial state and federal tax payments. However, little of the economic or fiscal benefits will flow to the town. From the bottom page of this report, okay, it says, it is also important to note that virtually all of the state and local tax revenues from the mine will go to government jurisdictions other than the town. What does that tell you? We're not going to be getting any money out of this project. It's going to destroy our environment. How could somebody support this project? It makes no sense. It's also going to destroy a sacred site. So these are from studies, government studies. They're not coming from me. This is factual documents. I mean, if people want to know. The town enters in an agreement with the mine. The mine says, hey, we know you need $2 million to purchase the old high school. They were selling it for $4 million. The mine goes, hey, we'll give you half of that. We'll give you $2 million on one condition, that you don't annex any of the mine property. In other words, let me show you this other chart. This right here is the West Plant operation on the west side of Superior. The infrastructure that's going to be built. It's only one street away from the town. But they told the town, if you annex this property, you have to pay us back or give us tax breaks on that $2 million. So basically, Resolution Copper is having Thanksgiving dinner, but Superior is invited, but they're going to be getting the crumbs. They can't have a turkey leg. They can't have a breast. They're getting all the crumbs. So does that make any sense? So now you know why I'm totally against this project, because there's no benefit to the town. They do give money to different organizations because, it's like if you need something and you're real nice to your wife and you clean the yard, you throw the garbage, and you ask her, hey, hon, can I buy this or can I have this? There's a reason behind them giving money, and that's how their operating plan is. We're going to give you money here and there, but they don't want the public to see this. And it's my job to educate these people on there. I'm not against mining, but not this type of mining. Like I said, I've got 24 years mining experience, but this does not benefit the town of Superior. The only people that are going to make money are the people that live out of our jurisdiction. Like I said, federal government, the state, the county, but that's what I've got to say. And there's more up here if you'd like to see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry, for citing and footnoting everything as well. I've read through the FEIS, and there's a lot there to be said. One of the impacts that you mentioned, obviously, is the impacts of the Oak Flat campground and subsidence, and among many other things. And this is also part of the modeling as well, 3D aerial photograph simulations of where the subsidence would occur. The bottom left corner shows the angle of subsidence and where that would occur, essentially from the crater to the fracture. And one of the things that was brought up in my questioning for the series was about Oak Flat Campground and how thousands of acres will be disturbed as a result of the subsidence. And Resolution Copper told us that Oak Flat Campground does not, or the FEIS does not suggest that Oak Flat Campground will be permanently disturbed or inaccessible, and that it would be not within the disturbed footprint of subsidence, um, and that they will plan to continue to keep the campground open as long as it can. That may be decades or in perpetuity, was part of a statement that they said. They also agreed to build a new campground should that one need to close one day. And they're also expanding recreational opportunities on private land that's within Oak Flat, the parcel, as well as Queen Creek for recreational trails, in addition to sports climbing and bouldering at the Inconceivable. And on that note, I wanted to bring Kurt in because I know you've been on this issue from the beginning back in 2004. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that response to the impacts. Chad, if you can go a slide or two. That's before we move forward. I just want to show too, going back to the point, all those. Oh, yeah, there you go. These dots here, all the water droplets reflect different groundwater dependent ecosystems that the FEIS highlights of concern. The big purple kind of gray heart shaped looking piece is where the crater would occur, the subsidence. And you could see all the way to the west, right by Queen Valley. There's a system that's all the way out there that may be affected due to the groundwater, and then there's a enlarged image of different groundwater dependent systems that even go through the crater itself. So on that note, it just gives you a sense of all the different types of hydrological impacts. If you can go ahead, Chad. This also shows modeling of the groundwater and pumping from James Wells, and talking about the groundwater levels can drop between 10 and 1,000 feet, depending on where that is, the modeling coming out of, and the dewatering process that will take place. You can go ahead to the next one. This, the reason I wanted to jump to this is this map actually shows climbing opportunities in and around Oak Flat that are recreational. As you can see, the red shapes, there's some that actually are within the subsidence crater that's marked that circle again. And so I bring that up to Kurt because I know he's been working on that for a long time, and curious about you weighing in on the recreational impacts as well. Not to say that all these other, not to say that isn't important compared to the water and the land, but that's a big part of this as well.
Okay, well, first, Gabe, I'd like to thank you and KJZZ for inviting me to be a part of this panel. And yeah, I've been involved in fighting the Resolution Copper Mine for 20 years now, mainly because, you know, I got interested because it threatens to destroy a fantastic rock climbing area. It's not only a great rock climbing area, the campground is a great place for hiking and birding and camping and other recreational activities. And that's kind of a minor reason to protect the area. I mean, you've already heard some of the more important reasons. This mine will trample on the religious rights of indigenous people, and it will cause everlasting environmental damage to the aquifers and use a lot of water that we frankly don't have. And I'd like to go back and hit on something that Alex Ritchie said, you know, he alluded to the fact that, you know, this was done, you know, at the last moment. The land exchange was put into a must-signed NDAA bill. But before that, in 1952, in fact, you know, the Forest Service sent out letters to districts in the West asking them to withdraw areas that were good for camping and recreation. And they specifically said only where there was reasonable possibility of conflict with mining interests. And as a result of that, in 1955, the Oak Flat campground in Arizona was withdrawn from mining and exploration by Public Land Order 1229. And, one of the sneaky things that this legislation did, the NDAA, is it undoes that protection. Mines, not Rio Tinto, but other mining companies had asked the Forest Service if they could overturn that withdrawal. And we have records of that. And every time that the Forest Service got a request like that, they went out to Oak Flat and they came back and said, no, this area is still a heavily used campground and it's still worthy of protection. So, and the fact, like Alex said, the fact that we had been able to keep this from being a law, the land exchange from being a law for 10 years, through both Republican administrations and Democratic administrations, really goes to show that it never would have passed on its own merits. It only passed because it was snuck into a piece of defense related must sign, must pass legislation. So it was done in a very sneaky, underhanded way, in my opinion. And to follow up on the water, in addition to Dr. Wells, we hired a guy named Steve Emmerman, who's a PhD geologist. And he said, that nobody believes that they're only going to use 250 billion gallons worth of water. He said that would be about 1/3 of the water per ton of copper ore that every other copper mine in Arizona uses, without explaining how they're going to save 2/3 of the water. They haven't explained at all how they're going to get by with 1/3 of the water from every other copper mine. So back to recreation, though. Yeah, it's an area that's dear to my heart. From 1989 to 2004, for 15 years running, the world's largest rock climbing competition was held at Oak Flat. It's called the Phoenix Bouldering Contest. And in the later years, it had 1,000 competitors, not only from every state in the Union, but people from Germany and France and other places would come to compete. And it had several thousand, spectators. And it's kind of a shame, that's gone now. And last of all, I would say that, like Henry said, Superior is a beautiful town. They have the chance right now to diversify their economy away from relying completely on mining. And if you look at all of the other mining towns that have been successful in doing that, like Bisbee and Jerome, they've all, those are arts communities now. They're not dependent on mining. And if this mine happens, which I hope it won't, then there's no chance of diversifying the economy afterwards, because everything will be destroyed that people come out there for.
As a follow-up to that, I'd like to ask, and this could be directed to the panel as well, more broadly, but to you, Kurt, first. One of the viewer submitted questions asked about, can potential outdoor recreation and tourism opportunities have a larger economic impact on the town than the mining opportunities? One of the things that I've heard a lot from Superior residents and people from there say that they really do cherish the outdoors. They love recreation. There's all these trails, Boyce Arboretum, Thompson Arboretum, among many other destinations. But at the same time, we may have a subsidence crater that's 2 miles wide. 1,000 feet deep, as you all mentioned. So I guess, how do we square the two, and is one better than the other? Do you have any thoughts on that? And just, I guess, how do we weigh those options?
Well, there's no doubt that, we need copper. But there's proper places to build a copper mine, and there's improper places to build a copper mine. And, you know, Oak Flat is a poster boy for bad places to build a copper mine for all the reasons I've already stated. Going back to the economics alone, this data is from 2021, which is the most recent valid data I have. 9.82 billion was spent on outdoor recreation in 2021, supporting 100,500 jobs. And that's from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Department of Commerce. And all of copper mining contributed 6.2 billion to Arizona's economy in 2021, while providing 11,330 jobs. And that's from the Arizona Mining Association. So in my opinion, it's very short-term thinking to have the copper mine. Sure, it will bring a few hundred jobs for 40 years, but 40 years will be gone in a flash. And outdoor recreation is sustainable. It could go on forever, unless, what people come there to recreate for is destroyed. That's my thoughts.
I saw a couple hands pop up. Alex, would you like to say something?
Thank you. In terms of economic impact, the mine, when it first was proposed, they were looking at 8,000 jobs. And to support them, they used a study by Pollock and Associates. Incredibly, that study looked at the price of copper increasing in value every single year over the life of the mine. In Arizona, we know that's not true. If you look at the stores in Superior and Claypool and Miami, you see a lot of shuttered, abandoned buildings. That's because the price of copper is cyclical. That study intentionally tried to make things look great. We, the tribe, hired two experts. Both are doctors of economics out of a university in the Midwest named Powers. It's father and son. They're both Dr. Power. And they pointed that out. And they said the real economic benefit is more like 600 jobs. It's a stunning difference. Well, San Carlos Apache tribe, over the past 10 years, went from, I believe the number is 1,500 jobs to now 3,000 jobs. And they did that not through copper, but through tourism and medical care and a college, which Dr. Mactima now teaches at, and other ventures such as a sawmill, a gravel pit, convenience stores, gas stations. And that shows how a rural economy can flourish. And in terms of economic impact, this is an LLC, a limited liability corporation. They can walk away from environmental damage, which will cost everybody in this room. There is a super fund, but the current administration is limiting that. The current administration is limiting the entire process for environmental impact studies. The current administration is changing how we view the environment. It is merely an economic tool now under the current administration. Water is just the means for production. There was a promise during the campaign that clean water, clean air would not be touched. Now the Council of Environmental Quality is saying, no, we can touch it. We can pollute it. There are changes going to occur in smelting in every single smokestack where there will be more pollution. And that has a cost. It has not just an environmental cost, but a cost in healthcare, cancer, mortality, and morbidity. People will die as a result. That means less productivity. That means a higher cost to society for the loss of those jobs, the loss of that productivity. and the cost itself on the healthcare system and on insurance. None of that's being looked at. And in the EIS itself, we pointed out, Dr. Wells pointed out, that the entire EIS was completely flawed. And yet it was being ramrodded at the very end of the last Trump administration. The other thing they forgot is that the law requires an EIS not just for the mine, but for the tailings. And so in our complaint, we pointed that out. There was no EIS for the tailings, and there should be. What the Forest Service did was pass it off as a special use permit. The problem with that is, well, the same tailings dam structure that failed in other countries and wiped out entire communities is the same structure that's being proposed at Skunk Camp. Rethink this. Talk to Congress, please. Thank you.
Henry, would you? Thank you. And just to clarify, that's Mariana you're referring to.
Yes.
That was Brazil's what is considered to be Brazil's worst environmental disaster, and it killed 19. And they just settled. The companies just settled $30 billion, I believe, a few months ago for the damages, close to a decade after the dam collapsed. Henry, you had your hand up. You've been waiting for a bit.
Yeah. There's a saying by Lao Tzu that if you feed a man fish, he will eat for a day. Teach him how to fish, and he'll eat for a lifetime. As the councilman, that was our main objective. The mines were feeding Superior all these years, and Superior never had the opportunity to reach out to different avenues, such as recreation, tourism, and to generate more revenue for the town and not be totally dependent on the mine. Once the mine shut down in 82, I came on the council in 89. We had a great council that year. And our main objective was to learn how to fish. You know, we did some big things. We brought in an industrial park. We had a couple of companies move in. We started a new housing development, the Highlands. We paved $1 million worth of streets. We consolidated our fire and our sanitary districts. We started a medical clinic on Main Street with the tobacco taxes. And we were moving on that direction. That's what we were looking forward to. Then the company comes along, and all of a sudden, they're feeding this town fish again. They've pulled away from that. But you know what? 40 years of mining is not guaranteed. I mean, I went down to London in 2022, and I spoke to the CEO, Jacob Strassel. And I asked him, you know, what are you going to do if you decide not to mine Oak Flats once this land exchange takes over? And he said, what do you want us to do with it? Well, you can either give it back to the government, give it to the tribe. And then he tells me that's never going to happen. So then he tells me, Henry, let me tell you something. And you'll never hear the company say this, but this is what he told me. Henry, before we open up that mine, we have to do a feasible economic study. We have to find out if it's feasible to mine at 7,000 feet. That way we can attract investors into this project. But remember that there is no mine that has block caved at 7,000 feet. So there's a lot of risks assured. They don't even know if they're going to open it themselves. But what the town should be fighting for is, hey, if you don't open this in a year, say if it passes, give it back to the U.S. government, give it to the tribe. We need that as a revenue source for the community, you know, and that's all I got to say on that.
Building on your point and what was repeated throughout the process about, like, for example, giving it back to the government, giving back to the tribe, and what Kurt was saying about the NDAA and as well as Attorney General Ritchie, I want to go back to Marcus for a moment because we talked about obviously John McCain and the differing views on the reservation about him with Mount Graham, obviously the Oak Flat, the NDAA. But last week we also had the passing of the late Representative Raul Grijalva, who was also on the other side of the pendulum, the biggest defender for Oak Flat, who had the Save Oak Flat from Foreign Mining Act that he had been introducing following the 2014 NDAA for his entire career. I'm curious if you had any thoughts about kind of how basically these ancestral Apache, but not just Apache, Hopi, Zuni, other Otham communities, Peepash and Peepash and Otham communities that all visited Oak Flat, had burial sites there, still do to this day, ancestral claims to land. How do we kind of square that history about the land that became part of the federal government, part of the Forest Service, and then that basically the government kind of trades it away to a foreign-owned multinational mining company? I was wondering you could weigh in on that.
I thought I was done talking. I'm sorry. uh, well, when I was initially doing my research on this topic, I did see, like he mentioned down there, that this bill on its own could not pass, right? And we've talked about this as well. Between 05 and 08, that bill, the Copper Basin Jobs Act, continuously failed over and over and over again. You could not sell this to the people for good reason, also, right? But when it came to the people themselves, right, the cultures that utilize this land. I mean, you can also speak to some of the economic impact from the people who go there as well. Like we mentioned with camping and all that. That place is also being used right now for dances as well, right? Where do people have to go to get material, right? They're either going to Phoenix or going to Superior if you're right there, right? And between 1900 and 1950, that location was being used by all kinds of people, right? Not just the tribes, but other recreational uses as well, right? Newspapers from the entire state were advertising Oak Flat as this great camping site as well, right? And then also tribes use that area for a lot of acorn picking as well, right? That was also being mentioned as a cultural significance to that site. But and with when the Save Oak Flat bill came out, right, it was an immediate response to the signing of the NDAA, and that also, same thing exactly happened with John McCain with Mount Graham as well, which is why I link these two events together, because the reason why we have that telescope is because John McCain did the same exact thing that he did with Oak Flat. He did the same exact thing to Mount Graham as well, right? So he snuck in the bill because it wouldn't have passed on its own merits. But in regard to the Save Oak Flat bill, though, right, it was kind of one of those things where it happened, but it happened too late, right? Where that the government had already stabbed us in the back with that, right? And the fact that because with that passing, that also represented the fact that no one read the bill either, right? No one looked at it. The president never looked at the bill. He just signed it. And then afterwards, he's, sorry, my bad, right? And then pass another bill and I'll sign it. That's a great, that's a great way for you to kind of kick the can down the road, essentially, right? But so the Save Oak Flat bill, I mean, I really appreciate that being a kind of point to remedy this situation altogether. But at the same time, this should have never happened to begin with, right? This should have never been passed. And we saw that with the history of the bill itself continuously falling apart. And not only that, but it also goes to show like how much this country in the 21st century still doesn't respect indigenous claims or indigenous presence even, right? Because they're trying to exterminate that entirely out of this region altogether. And we think that we've progressed and moved forward in the 21st century, but things are still the same, right? The only thing that's changed is the time, and that's it, right? So And for a lot of us, this is just par for the course, right? And that's something to be expected from this government. It doesn't matter Democrat, Republican. It doesn't matter, right? It's under a or the Democrat presidency that we saw this place get put back to to others who to exploit it, right? And it was no longer protected anymore. And it's now under a Republican presidency that we're probably going to see the continuance of this mine moving forward, right? Because we know this current political situation, right? And so it's all the same for Indigenous peoples. This is the continuation of the same genocidal history that we've experienced since first contact, right? And that's it. Yeah.
Russ, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, appreciate that analysis, and I wanted to add a little bit to that. A couple of things that were brought up, just to sort of mark the passing of Congressman Raul Grijalva, who was, as Marcus said, a great champion for the Save Oak Flat Act. He introduced that bill multiple times. And just to add some context there, because Congress pushed forward this land exchange, technically only Congress can overturn this land exchange. And so that bill, which Grijalva, was pushing while he was alive, would have allowed Congress to see the errors of its ways and just completely revoke it, and it would stop this dead in its tracks. And one problem, you sort of talked about this is a bipartisan issue where both parties are complicit in this. We spent a lot of time trying to get Senator Mark Kelly to support the Save Oak Flat Act, and he just absolutely would not. The same goes with Kirsten Sinema. And so, and the arguments we would get from that side were that we need copper, we need this green energy transition. And so it's absolutely necessary to do it. But as Marcus said, if you look at the history, what are they really saying there? They're saying that the material needs of this nation will come from the land of indigenous people. This is Manifest Destiny 2.0, just a new example. And we have Democrats doing this as much as Republicans, saying, well, sorry, this is a sacrifice zone. But who's sacrificing? Once again, for the material needs of the nation, Native Americans. And I just wanted to reiterate that.
I'd like to go back to Attorney General Ritchie because you mentioned, urging audience members to speak to Congress. Do you have any thoughts about, the Save Oak Flat from Foreign Mining Act, in the wake of, Representative Grijalva's passing? And do you see hope? One of our viewers actually wrote to us saying, is there a possibility for legislation to protect Oak Flat to move forward? Is their interest still available? Was what they actually asked. I just wondering if you had any thoughts about that. Do you think Arizona's congressional delegation could champion this issue in its wake?
First and foremost, save Oak Flat from foreign mining interests is the bill. And the 2 points I made tonight are things that people really should talk to your congressional representatives and senators. Those are Arizona can't afford to lose this much water. Just can't. The second is, why are we giving the copper to the People's Republic of China? I just can't comprehend that. I can't comprehend that folks in Congress who have taken such a stalwart stance on the freedom of other folks in the South Pacific and the aggression that the People's Republic of China poses in the South Pacific are not hearing this. This copper is going to China. It's simple. Ask your congressman, your congresswoman, your senator, why are you allowing the copper to go to China? Why are you allowing these two companies to take all the water? Why are you allowing a Superfund site that this company can walk away from? For how many jobs? And oh, by the way, I forgot a small statistic. Those 600 jobs, 300 are going to be in Utah, running the computers that are going to work the mine underground. Why are there computers involved? Well, it's too hot down there, 7,500 feet. No human being can use a pickaxe at that depth because it's so hot. It's 140 degrees. They need robots. Robots are going to do this mine. We're moving fast towards AI, and here's a great way of getting AI to be most productive. So those are the points. It's going to desecrate Native American land and religion. And by the way, a lot of Republicans in the Congress during Obama's tenure believed that. And that's why they wouldn't support this bill. A lot of Republicans didn't want this copper exported. A lot of Republicans were concerned about two foreign mining giants getting so much land from the Tonto National Forest for this purpose. Number two, it's going to consume amount of groundwater that cannot be replaced during a severe drought and the projected restrictions on surface water supplies, including the Colorado River. Three, it inflicts permanent economic damage to the East Salt River Valley by depleting water that otherwise could be used far more sustainably. Number four, it would provide access to one of the largest copper deposits on Earth that is currently owned by the American people and giving it away to China. That's my answer. Thanks.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to do a final lightning round of questions, or of questions for all panelists to answer. And we really appreciate all of your time being here and engaging in a really interesting discussion about a lot of different topics. So you get a cross cut of politics, religion, culture, the environment, water, economy. Is a big history, a big lesson, a big, big class to say the least. The series that we put out that I've been putting together for the last 6 months or so is called Oak Flat: Past, Present, and Future. Past, Present, Future. And I'd like to ask each of you what you think the future of Oak Flat is. Kurt, do you want to start possibly, or whoever would like to start? And we can go. We can work our way around. I know it's a big question.
Well, I know what I would like it to be. I mean, I would like it to remain a place that, Apaches go to gather acorns and do religious ceremonies. I would like to see it remain a place where people can go rock climb. It's a great rock climbing area, and it's within 50 miles of the fifth largest city in the United States. So it's very accessible to people who want to recreate out there. Yeah, I'll let it go at that.
I don't know. It's going to depend on you, the listeners, the people watching this. It's going to depend on your neighbors. It's going to depend on all Arizonans. It's going to depend on San Carlos Apache tribe. It's going to depend on lawyers. It's going to depend on facts and truth. And without that getting out there, that future is uncertain.
Well, what I'd like to see is I'd like to see Oak Flats last forever. That's a recreational hub for us. It's going to generate money for us. Resolution Copper says, well, we've banked enough CAP water for the use of the mine. But who built the CAP? Who built Hoover Dam? Lake Mead right now is at like 34% capacity of what it is. If you look at the Navajo Nation in the Four Corners, 30% of those people don't have running water that we take advantage of. How could we give this water to two foreign mining companies, to include communist China? No way. Leave it alone.
I think I just say that I think Oak Flat should be returned to the original stewards of the land, to include the Apache people, and I'll leave it at that.
I'm a historian, so mine might not be the most optimistic because I've having researched, and spent 12 years getting a doctorate. I've looked at the history and I only see one thing, and that's this colonial entity wanting to see the extinction of native peoples, because our continued existence reminds this country of what they did in the past. And the fact that we still remain is a big contention for this country, because it means that this country exists out of the removal of native peoples, out of the death of native peoples. And this colonial power that continues to advance itself for its own benefit, not for the people's benefit, it means that the history shows that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I've heard that before. And I think it's a great example of that. Because the things change every century, every decade, things change, but the intention still remains. It just changes. So for me, I just see this continuing in the same way that it has in the past. And it's going to continue moving that way until we are gone, until they've gotten rid of all of us. So this colonial power is going to do what colonial powers do, what imperialist powers do, and that is continue to move forward with extinction of indigenous peoples. And until that goes away, I don't see any change for that at all. So that's my perspective. Unfortunately, it's a little bit more gloomy than others, but that's the reality. And I think that's what people need to know, is that this is the reality for us, and we've experienced this for centuries at this point, millennia, maybe even, soon, I guess, but it feels like millennia, even in my own short 40 years. It seems like a long time, but that's my gloomy outlook. I'm sorry.
No, thank you all, and thank you for sharing. I really appreciate you answering that question. I know it's a big ambiguous one, and we don't really know what the future is of Oak Flat. And depending on, like you said, with the Apache Stronghold case, as early as Monday, we may have a new decision in favor or against the hearing the case for the religious freedom and argument. And so we have to wait and see. And for now, that is still in limbo. And we thank you all for taking the time to speak with us. And thanks again to our sponsor tonight, the Katina Foundation. And thank you again to all of our guests. And thank you for all those who are here in person, online, for taking part in this panel. And have a good evening. Thank you.